The champagne glass shattered first. Then came the gasp, rippling across the ballroom like a wave nobody wanted to ride. A woman near the cake table pressed both hands to her mouth. Somewhere behind the DJ booth, a phone was already recording. And in the center of the dance floor, beneath the soft gold lighting that had been strung up for a wedding, a woman named Emma Carter lay crumpled on the marble, her wheelchair tipped uselessly beside her, her legs motionless, her scream still hanging in the air like smoke that refused to clear. 2 weeks earlier, none of this seemed possible. Emma was 34 years old, and she had built a life she was quietly proud of. 5 years before that wedding day, a drunk driver ran a red light and turned her world into wreckage. 3 months in the hospital, 11 surgeries, nearly a year of rehabilitation that taught her how to dress herself again, how to transfer from bed to chair without help, how to exist in a body that no longer obeyed her the way it used to. Doctors told her, gently but plainly, that she would never walk again. She cried for a week. Then she got up, figuratively, since she couldn't literally, and she rebuilt. She finished her accounting certification from a hospital bed. She bought a modest, wheelchair-accessible home with ramps she'd designed herself. She became the kind of person strangers admired without knowing the half of what she'd survived. Her younger brother Ryan was 31, and he had always been the golden child. Growing up, if Ryan broke a lamp, Emma got blamed for leaving it in his path. If Ryan failed a class, their mother Linda found a teacher to fault. Their father, Michael, mostly stayed quiet, refilling his coffee and letting the storms pass over him rather than through him. Ryan learned, long before he could spell the word, that consequences were something that happened to other people. So when the wedding invitation arrived, a stiff cream envelope with Ryan and his fiancée Sophia's names embossed in gold, no note, no call, nothing personal at all. Emma almost didn't open it. She almost let it sit on the counter until it curled at the edges and became one more thing she quietly let go of. But her friend Daniel, a physical therapist who had guided her through years of recovery and had become the steadiest person in her life, told her something that stuck. You don't have to go for him. Go because you get to, because you survived, and showing up is a kind of victory too. So she went. The venue was beautiful. String lights woven through the rafters of a converted barn, wildflowers spilling out of mason jars, the smell of rosemary and roasted garlic drifting from the kitchen. Guests greeted Emma warmly as she rolled in beside Daniel. An aunt she hadn't seen in years took her hand and said, "Look at you. You look wonderful." A cousin's husband told her, unprompted, that she was the strongest person he'd ever met. Emma smiled and thanked them, and for a moment, she let herself believe the day might be kind to her. Ryan noticed every compliment. She watched his jaw tighten a fraction each time someone leaned down to speak to her, watched the practiced wedding day smile flicker like a bulb about to die. She told herself she was imagining it. She had spent years training herself not to read cruelty into her brother's silences. But silence, it turned out, was not what she needed to worry about. It started small, the way most cruelty does. Quiet enough to explain away. Frequent enough to leave bruises anyway. During family photos, Ryan asked the photographer if they could do one without the wheelchair in it, just to keep it clean. The photographer, a stranger to all of them, said simply, "The wheelchair is part of who she is," and kept shooting. Emma murmured that it was fine. It was not fine. Later, she noticed her table had been moved without anyone telling her, tucked behind a support beam where the dance floor wasn't visible. When she mentioned it lightly to a bridesmaid, the bridesmaid looked uncomfortable and said Ryan had asked for the seating chart to be adjusted. At one point, pouring drinks for a group of groomsmen, Ryan joked that wheelchair parking ought to cost extra at weddings like this one. A few people laughed, the nervous kind of laugh that fills a silence rather than answers a joke. Daniel, standing near the bar, didn't laugh. He watched Ryan order another whiskey and then another, and filed the number away in his mind the way he filed away every warning sign in his years of clinical training. During cocktail hour, 3 different guests asked Emma about her recovery, about the nonprofit work she'd started doing on weekends mentoring people newly injured in accidents like hers. She spoke about it with the ease of someone who had turned pain into purpose. A woman nearby said loud enough to carry, "Honestly, she's the strongest person I've ever met." Ryan, refilling his glass a few feet away, said nothing. But something in his shoulders changed, something old and ugly, something that had been simmering since he was 9 years old and watched his sister get praised for a piano recital he thought he deserved more credit for. Rose a little closer to the surface. Their mother, Linda, found Emma near the gift table and pulled her aside, her voice pitched low and sweet in the way that used to fool Emma as a child. "Sweetheart," she said, "I need you to do something for me today. Please, don't make this about yourself." Emma blinked, genuinely confused. "What have I done?" she asked. Linda's smile didn't waver. "You're getting a lot of attention. It's Ryan's day." Emma sat with that sentence for a long moment after her mother walked away, turning it over like a stone with something sharp underneath. She had done nothing but exist in a wheelchair at her brother's wedding, and somehow that had become an offense. Dinner came and went. Ryan gave a speech about family, about how the people who raised him had taught him everything about love, and the room applauded, moved, unaware of the meaning buried beneath his words. Then the music started. Couples spilled onto the dance floor. Emma sat near the edge, swaying to the rhythm, clapping along, genuinely happy to watch her brother's new wife laugh with her bridesmaids. For a few minutes, the day felt almost normal, almost kind. Then Ryan started walking toward her. He'd been drinking heavily for hours by then. His tie loosened, his face flushed red under the string lights. Daniel noticed him first and started moving too, some instinct in him recognizing the shape of what was coming before it had a name. Ryan stopped in front of Emma's wheelchair, swaying slightly, and the music seemed to fade beneath the sudden hush spreading outward from where he stood. "Let's stop pretending," he said, loud enough for the tables nearest them to hear. Emma looked up at him, confused, the smile still frozen half-formed on her face. "Ryan, what are you talking about?" "You've fooled everyone long enough," he said, and something in his eyes had gone flat and glassy, years of resentment finally finding a stage. "Enough pretending you're hurt." Before Emma could respond, before Daniel could close the distance between them, before a single guest could process what was happening, Ryan reached down and grabbed her beneath both arms. He pulled. Hard. Emma's body slid from the wheelchair in one violent motion, and there was no controlling the fall, no bracing for it, because her legs, the legs that had not moved in 5 years, that could not catch her, that could not do anything a body needs its legs to do in the half second before it hits the ground, simply hung there, useless, as she crashed onto the dance floor. The sound of her hitting the marble was the sound that would replay in dozens of nightmares for weeks afterward. For Emma, for Daniel, for every guest who stood frozen in the wreckage of the moment. Emma screamed, a sound raw with shock and pain, and for one terrible instant, nobody moved at all, as if the whole room had been unplugged. "Stand up!" Ryan shouted at her, swaying over her crumpled body, his voice cracking with a fury that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with 31 years of feeling unseen. "Stand up! You can do it! I know you can!" Emma could not stand up. Emma could not do anything but lie there, sobbing, her wrist bent at a wrong angle, her shoulder screaming with a pain distinct from the humiliation clawing through her chest. Daniel reached her first, dropping to his knees, his voice suddenly all business, all clinical calm laid over visible fury. "Don't move her!" he barked at anyone leaning too close. "Someone call 911, now!" A guest near the DJ booth, phone already raised from the moment Ryan had started walking toward Emma, kept filming, hands shaking. Sophia, the bride, radiant an hour earlier, still in her ivory gown, pushed through the crowd and stared down at her husband of 6 hours with an expression Emma would remember for the rest of her life, horror curdling into disbelief. "What did you just do?" Sophia's voice cracked on every word. "She's faking," Ryan said, though his own voice had gone thin now, uncertain, the whiskey courage draining out of him as reality closed in. "She's been faking this whole time. She just wants attention." Daniel looked up at him with a coldness Emma had never seen from her gentle friend. "She has a complete spinal cord injury," he said. "There is nothing to fake. There has never been anything to fake." He turned back to Emma, checking her pulse, her breathing, murmuring reassurances until sirens finally sounded in the distance. At the hospital, doctors found a broken wrist, torn shoulder ligaments, bruised ribs, and a mild concussion. New injuries layered on top of old ones, a body that had already survived one catastrophe, now forced to survive the cruelty of someone who should have protected her. Emma lay in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors humming quietly around her, and asked Daniel only one question. "Did everyone see?" Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly, because she deserved honesty even when it hurt. "Yes." She cried then, not from the pain radiating through her wrist and shoulder, but from something deeper and older, a grief that had been waiting a long time for permission to surface. The video, of course, did not stay contained to that ballroom. Within 2 days, it had spread across every platform imaginable, viewed millions of times, shared with captions of outrage and disbelief. Strangers who had never met Emma left comments defending her, condemning Ryan, tagging disability advocacy organizations who issued statements about the dangers of denying invisible and visible disabilities alike. News producers called Emma's phone so often, she eventually turned it off. She wanted none of the spotlight. She only wanted quiet and time and the chance to heal without an audience. Sophia, meanwhile, was unraveling a version of her husband she had never been allowed to see. Digging through old messages in the days that followed, she found years of texts between Ryan and his friends, cruel jokes about Emma's disability, complaints that she stole attention at every family gathering, bitter commentary stretching back years before Sophia had even entered the picture. She realized with a kind of quiet devastation that she had married a stranger wearing a familiar face. Weeks later, she filed for divorce, unwilling to build a life with someone capable of what she'd witnessed on the dance floor. Emma filed a civil lawsuit. Police opened an investigation into possible assault charges. Security footage from the venue, later entered as evidence, showed with unbearable clarity what dozens of witnesses had already described: Ryan crossing the dance floor with clear intent, grabbing his sister, and pulling her from her wheelchair with enough force to send her crashing to the ground. There was no ambiguity left for anyone to hide behind. The family that had spent decades protecting Ryan finally began to fracture under the weight of what he'd done. Linda, even then, tried to explain it away. He'd been drinking, he didn't mean it, he'd always had a temper, but a good heart underneath. Michael, for the first time in 30 years, refused to stay silent. "I spent 3 decades protecting the wrong child," he told his wife quietly one evening, and the words seemed to cost him something enormous to say aloud. Ryan lost his job within the month, his employer citing reputational concerns after the video's circulation. Friends who had once filled his contact list stopped answering his calls. The golden child of the Carter family, who had never once faced a real consequence in his life, finally faced them all at once. Healing for Emma did not happen in a straight line. There were nights she replayed the fall in her mind, the sound of her body hitting marble, the sight of her brother's face contorted with a rage that had been building since childhood. There were mornings she didn't want to get out of bed, let alone into her chair. But slowly, with Daniel beside her and a growing community of people who reached out, strangers who had watched that video and recognized pieces of their own pain in it, she began to rebuild the way she always had. Months later, she stood at a podium at a disability advocacy conference, her wrist long since healed, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering beneath her composure. She looked out at a room full of strangers and told them the truth she had been carrying since that wedding day. "People often assume the hardest part of living with a disability is losing the use of your legs," she said, pausing to let the silence settle. "It isn't. The hardest part is when someone who's supposed to love you decides your pain isn't real unless it's convenient for them to believe it." The room rose to its feet. Daniel, standing near the back, smiled with a pride he didn't try to hide. A year after the wedding, Emma launched a small nonprofit dedicated to helping people with spinal cord injuries access wheelchairs, home modifications, and legal support when they face discrimination or abuse. The kind of resource she wished had existed for her sooner. The organization grew quietly but steadily, built entirely from the wreckage of the worst day of her life. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail, her father's handwriting unmistakable on the envelope. Inside was a single line: "I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up for you." Emma read it twice, folded it carefully, and set it on the windowsill beside a small potted plant she'd been nursing back to health for months. She didn't forgive everyone. She didn't forget what had happened on that dance floor or in the years of quiet cruelty that had led up to it. But she understood finally that healing was never about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let it decide what came next. She wheeled herself to the window, looked out at the afternoon light spilling gold across her yard, and for the first time in a long time, she simply breathed, steady, whole, and entirely her own.